Hi, this is Henning from FlippedNormals, and in today's video we will go through how we can take this model here, which was donated by Reborn on our Discord, and turn it into this model here. This is about an hour and 20 minutes, 10 minutes or so, of real-time sculpting, showing you all the steps on how to go from here to here. We will cover things like proportion, anatomy, how to create good shapes, and generally a lot of general sculpting techniques. So I really hope that you'll enjoy this video, and I hope that you can improve your sculpting a lot. Now, before we get into the sculpting in ZBrush, if you're interested in improving your sculpting skills significantly, I highly recommend our Introduction to Sculpting course, where we cover basically everything you need to know in order to get properly good at sculpting. This is intended for people who are new to sculpting, but also people who've been doing this for a while, where we go through how to sculpt this dwarf start to finish, starting from a sphere, ending up with a final result, going through a lot of different anatomy, and talking about a lot of interesting topics such as compression and stretching, gesture, both internal and external gesture, and going through very common mistakes that you find in a lot of different sculpts. So I really think that you'll enjoy our Introduction to Sculpting course. Now let us jump into ZBrush. Starting off in ZBrush, we have our model to the right and we have our reference to the left. This is very easy to do if you have only two subtools. So I have the model and I have the anatomy model. And if you go to transform, and then we go down here to split screen, and I'll just put this into my interface here. So this just becomes really easy. This is also why we don't have eyes on the model, because that would mess that system up. But pretty nice and simple setup for now. Really good if you have some kind of scan reference or something like this. So we are going to be treating this model in a few different stages. The first stage is going to be proportion. We are going to go through a lot of universal proportions, which you can find in most people. It's really useful to have a general sense of proportion before we really get too deep into anything else. If you can take a model up to a decent level with universal proportions, everything is going to be so much easier. You can, of course, line your models up to general reference. And of course, that's advisable in general, but it's a huge benefit to be able to do it without the reference, meaning that you can take something up to like some kind of generic level like this without too much reference, and then you can use the reference to really like perfect the model instead of using it as a crutch. The second step is going to be actually refining the surface shapes, because you can see we have quite a lot of rough surface shapes here, and we just have to unify that and make that look really nice and pretty. The third step is going to make it feel nice and anatomical. Here you can see we have the bony landmarks, we have soft tissue, we have specific shapes of the eyes and mouth and nose and such. So we'll of course get that into the model as well. And then the last thing we are going to be doing is we're going to give him more of a design, meaning that in this case here, we have a pretty refined anatomy model, but it's not a good design. It's a generic design. And we want this to feel more like a person. So that's where we're putting in more of a character design into him and making him feel more like a actual person. So let us get started with some proportions. We are just going to draw proportions on this guy here. And now if we imagine that the head is a general cube like so, then these are general proportions. These are not true for every single person, but they're true enough. They're true to the point that they're useful. If you draw this around in half like so, this is where you can see the eyes. They're around the center mark. This is at least for an adult person. This is different for children. They're also sometimes a little bit above the halfway point, but they're not like up here or anything. This is a huge beginner mistake. And here you can actually see this on this person here, where they're way more, if the halfway point is here, they're way more up here. So we really have to make sure that we put them around in the center. And now if we split this again in half, like so, now the nose is around in the halfway point from here. And if we split this in half, like this part here, now the mouth is between the halfway point and like 1/3 of the point up here. And there is a lot of variation here, of course, but that's generally a fairly true rule. Now, the width of the nose is around the same width of the eye, which means the corners of the nose here would line up pretty well with the corners of the eye. And I found this to be a really handy landmark. This just makes it feel a lot more universal. And then we have about another width of an eye over here as well. So we have around 5 widths of the eyes. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, like so. If I remove all these proportions now, because it's getting a bit messy. For the ears as well, there is a lot of variation here when it comes to the ears, but a general rule is around where the eyebrow is to around where the nose is. In this case here, for my anatomy model, it's a little bit smaller, but and also this does vary a fair bit as well, but you can also say from the eye as well, but it's around this general area, meaning that it's not going to be like up here, for instance. So it's not going to align with like the eye here, and it's also not going to be like this large as well. So it's like a pretty good general landmark to have. So these are some of the general proportions that we have to get right. If you can get some general universal proportions in your model, that's going to help you so much. So the biggest one here is that the eyes are way too large. So we can just move them down like so with the move brush, or we can use the pinch brush as well. This will just this is basically just a shrink brush. And then we just need to move them down. You usually will have to move it further down than you think. Move it down so it's a little bit uncomfortable, and then you move it up as well. So eyes in a better spot. We'll move the nose in as well. And the only thing I'm concerned about now is the overall proportion of the face. I'm not really thinking about anything else. I'm just thinking about what we covered before. Doing this, halfway point, and around like the 1/3 mark. One width here, this goes up here, this goes up here, and it's around one nose wide. So these are some general useful proportions. And that's how I'm really thinking about this for now. We also have to make sure the neck is a lot thicker as well. And a general note whenever you're sculpting, it's very, very easy to just stick to one view like this without thinking about the other views. Now, he's starting to look a lot better, but if you rotate him, you can see that he has all sorts of issues. So we really have to make sure that the model in general is working from all angles. You're not doing a drawing from the front view, which might be tempting to do. You're doing a sculpt, which is fundamentally a 3-dimensional object. And something that we're missing as well, which is really, really important to get in. I know this is more of a quicker study, but ears. You have to get in the ears very early on. And the reason for that is you cannot make it look like a person if it's missing the ears. It just looks like a really odd character. So make sure to get the ears in. And the way I prefer to do the ears is to just mask off this area here, and then control clicking like so, and then using the move brush and just pushing this out like so. Poly count wise, we are around 1 million now, and that's what the model was provided as. And honestly, that's fine. And when it comes to the ears, I think about the ears as you have the hole here in the skull, and this fits really well with the angle here. So it always goes from the angle of the jaw, and then you get this nice little thing going out like so. So it means that this is another really useful way of thinking about proportion. It does not work in a sense that the ear is like over here and the jaw is here. You don't have any gap between these. These are always connected up. Sometimes a little bit forward, sometimes a little bit behind, but generally is always at that angle. Something to consider as well when doing ears is you really have to make sure that you push it in on the back here. So just inverting the mask. And think about how thin the ears actually are. It's very important to make sure that you get the thinness of the ears. So cool, already now he feels more like a character. We also just have to push the ears in a little bit. A common mistake as well is to do this, where the ears are pushed way, way too far forward. So we just have to push them in a little bit. If you're from the front view, you're probably not going to be seeing all of the entire shape of the ears. You're not going to see them like so. They're going to be a little bit obscured by the cheekbones. So proportion-wise, we are in a much, much, much better spot now. So cool. Also, I didn't mention this, but I was doing this rudely without even talking about it. I was reducing the size of the body as well. Okay. Cool. And then let us treat the surface. Now, there are a few different ways we can treat the surface. And I'll show you 2 ways. The first one is that you can go over with the clay buildup brush without any alphas on it, and then we can just go a bit crazy on it. Just like go over like so, and you can see how the shape just softens off right away. This is a bit more of an advanced technique because you have to understand how the clay brushes work. And while I do really recommend that, another technique is to straight up use the smooth brushes. But instead of just using the regular smooth, check it out, we have a smooth stronger brush. You can find this if you go to Lightbox, and then we go to brush. And here we should have the smooth brushes, which is right here. And then we have smooth stronger right here. So if you double click on this, this is just going to replace the shift key. A little pro tip in ZBrush as well, like a lot of people don't know about. The shift key isn't actually the smooth brush at all. The shift key is just a modifier key for a brush, which happens to be mapped to the smooth brush. So you can map whatever you want here. If you want like this chisel brush or the blob brush to the shift key, that is totally fine. So we are just going to go over this with Smooth Stronger. Smooth Stronger is fantastic because particularly when you're working on higher poly counts like this, it works really well. It's really tricky to get good clean shapes with the smooth brush when you have something like 1,000,000 polygons, at least with a regular smooth brush. But Smooth Stronger, it just eats it up. And we've been talking about in some of our earlier videos that you should generally avoid the smooth brush, and that's because it destroys the shape. And while that is true, it does destroy the shape, it's great if you understand how it works. So if you're able to control the smooth brush, then the smooth brush is fantastic. It's a really good brush for quickly unifying a lot of shapes. I just don't want to see you doing this where you just smooth out everything. Smooth locally. The way I'm thinking about it now, for instance, is that here we have a shape of the nose. So I'm kind of in my mind masking it off like so, blurring the mask a little bit. And like I'm not actually doing this in ZBrush, I'm just doing it mentally. And then I'm just like softening it off. So this is how I'm doing when it comes to the mouth, for instance. I'm trying to preserve the top line of the, or like the different interior lines of the mouth here. So that we can just do this. And then we preserve the border edges. So cool, already now it looks a lot better. We also will just have to simplify this whole region down because this is quite messy. Like anatomically, this doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So we just need to simplify this down a crazy amount. So it is really important to treat the surface, like really understand how you make good, clean shapes. So just going over this. Sculpting is really all about getting clean shapes. Anatomy is a tool for getting clean shapes. It's a tool for getting the correct, good shapes. But you could have perfectly correct anatomy, meaning that you could have like all the muscles and the bones and such in the correct spot. But if the model looked like the original model here that we picked up, meaning that it proportion-wise is correct, but the surface was as messy as that, wouldn't matter. It would still be a really rough sculpt. So it's really important that you understand that sculpting is fundamentally about getting clean shapes. So don't just get locked into the, oh, I have to have perfect anatomy. It's really not just about that. So now we are in a much better spot. So then what we can focus on is we can start to get into the more of the facial anatomy. And this is really important to get right. Like I just mentioned, it's not everything, but it is a lot. It is really important to get this in. So what I'm looking at here when it comes to the facial anatomy, the first thing I'm thinking about is the bones. You have to think about the bony structure whenever you're doing anything when it comes to, well, anything to do with sculpting. So the areas we're concerned about would be like getting in the cheekbones, getting in like the glabella area here, getting in the overall skull. Basically anything that is directly shown in the sculpt. These are referred to as bony landmarks. You have, of course, like a spine underneath all this, but that's not really a bony landmark, at least not the majority of it, because it's not seen directly. So it's really important to establish these areas here. And it's also really important to establish what's going to be made out of bone and what's going to be made out of flesh. Because if you can define the surface simply by, like define the material of the surface simply by the sculpting technique, everything is going to be so much easier. The sculpt is going to look so much more natural. So what are we looking for here? Well, specifically, we have to get in the bony landmarks here. So we really have to just make sure that we get in the cheekbones like so. And we have to make sure that we get in the skull up here. I mean, everything is a skull, right? But just to make sure we get in these marks here, this becomes really important. One way you can think about it is that if we were to like touch different parts of your face and like wobble the finger around, like if you were to touch like this area here and you try to like wobble it around, you feel there's a little bit of skin sliding, but it's like firm area. Same like up here as well. Like the skin is sliding a little bit because there's obviously skin on top and there's muscle on top as well, but it's still a really firm area. But if you try to like touch like the nose here and you wobble that around, you can feel how much it actually wobbles side to side. You know, like this is probably going to do like properly like this. Well, this on top here is going to do a little bit side to side. And the reason for that is these areas here are all bone. Well, this here is all cartilage. Same here as well. If you do it for lips as well, you can just see how much something deforms. So that's really, really important to understand whenever we are sculpting a realistic person. So I'm just going to change the brush here to alpha 06, just with a clay builder brush. This is how I tend to work most of the time. And then we're just getting in the cheekbones. And we will definitely keep revisiting proportion as we're doing this as well. It's not like you do proportion and now you're done with proportion. And then you do the anatomy and you're done with the anatomy. No, it's a non-linear process. So everything I'm doing now, this is just getting in the bone. Just getting in all like the bony landmarks. Really just making sure that we have these parts in here. Getting in the chin as well. So this part here, this is mostly like a fleshy area, and this part here is mostly like a bony area. And I'm going to work in a pretty planar fashion now. I'm going to get in quite a lot of actual planes into the face. And this just makes it a lot easier, meaning you have a lot of more structure into like in your work, and it's a lot easier to like know exactly what's going on in that area. Like, don't be shy, really just get in there and get the shapes in there. And then in this area, you just have to carve this in more than you think you do. Like so. And here something interesting happens. Right here, we are going from bone to cartilage. So this part here is bone, and this part here is all cartilage. And that becomes really important because this changes how, like, the proportions of the area, and it changes really how you would treat the whole area. And particularly if you start to deform the skull as well, like, and you do this, you know, by moving your face around. Like you start to talk, you blink, all these kind of things is deforming the face. You're breathing, like if you're breathing, like your nostrils are going to get bigger and smaller. Well, this area up here is not, because it's bone. So just getting in these parts here. And just being pretty firm. Whenever you're doing anything like this, and when you're like you're doing feedback either on somebody else's work or you're doing feedback on your own work, just be brutal about it. Don't care what's been put down. Just think about how can you improve this the most, and then you'll deal with like if there's a specific design or something, then you try to get that in a bit later. But first, you have to make sure it feels more anatomical. So we will have to get this shape here in as well. This is the nasolabial fold. And this is a shape that is really important to get in. Everyone will have the nasolabial fold to some extent. In some people, it's really clear. Like it's just like a crazy shape. And in some people, there's just like a little hint of it. A big deciding factor here is your age. So I'm just going to carve this in. But a common mistake as well is to carve it right here where the mouth goes. You have to leave a little bit of room for it. Cool. So now we carve this in. And a way of doing this can be that you straight up draw shapes into it. Like here, we have some of the facial muscles, or some of the facial planes at least. And you can straight up just draw them in, like almost like you're drawing in with a like a pencil on top of the surface. Like it shouldn't feel like a drawing at the end, but it's a good idea to do it in the beginning, because that way you make sure that you're getting in very specific shapes, and then you have to of course make them feel volumetric. Now, a huge beginner mistake when it comes to the nose, maybe one of the biggest ones, is if we were to, I'm just going to move this out of the way. Now, if you look at the nose here and look at the nose here as a nice little box, it can help to turn things into boxes. And now notice where the lip here on top of the lip actually goes into it. It goes in here, around like almost like the 1/3 mark. If this is like the halfway mark, it's almost like around 1/3. It goes in here. In this case, it goes at the very end, which means there's a lot of volume missing here. So we really have to make sure that this is being pushed out. So let us do that real quick. Just straight up, just take this entire area and just push it all out. But now what you're seeing is we're just pushing the whole thing out. We're not pushing in the, we just want to push the, really the insertion point here. We don't want to push the nostrils, so just make sure you push the nostrils in as well. It's really important that the nostrils actually goes properly into the face. All right, and we'll just keep this loose. We'll just keep this loose for now, and of course we'll go in and define it later on. And then here I have to soften this whole area off a little bit, and just make this like make this a little bit more volumetric. And still, same poly count. My general rule for adding more topology is whenever you have run out of resolution, meaning that you can't get in the shapes you want because the topology keeps stretching. That's a general useful rule of thumb. I can't give you a specific number of the poly count. I can't be like, well, at this stage you need 1 million and at the other stage you need 200,000, because it depends so heavily. What if you're just doing the face? Obviously you require like 1/4 of the topology as you do for the rest. And what if you have a whole torso? You know, like it just depends on case to case, and also like on what you're sculpting as well. If you're sculpting more like a young woman, you probably need less topology than you do if you're sculpting like some kind of like gnarly monster or something like that, just because there's more shapes to describe. The eyes are stupidly important to get right. If you get everything else in the body right, but the eyes are not looking correct, then it doesn't matter. It literally does not matter, because it's going to look like a bad sculpt. Get the eyes right and everything else follows, but mess up the eyes and you will just have a bad sculpt. Now, we will have to add a sphere to this, but I can't do it yet because, you know, I'm doing my little trick here. So if I have more than 2 subtools, it's going to mess up a little bit. So I'm going to do my best approximation of an eyeball, and then we'll put in an eyeball later on where we rely less on the anatomy model. The way I think about the eyeball or the eye is that we have a shape that goes like so. We have the upper eyelid, and that goes like so. And notice how it goes over the bottom eyelid. It goes like so. Here, there's a plane change. In some people, this is very clear, and some people you barely see it. Then we have the bottom eyelid, and that has a very clear plane change right here. So this goes like so, and this goes underneath the upper eyelid. Also something to consider here, there's a very clear plane change when it comes to the eye. Really make sure that you get the plane change into your sculpt. This is crazy important. Then we have the corner of the eye as well, that's right here. This is really important to get right. Then we have basically like a ball shape wrapping around the whole thing. This just wraps beautifully around the eyeball. And then down here as well, you see we have a little bit of the skull sticking through, and then it goes down like so. Then it goes up like so. And that is how I like to think about the eye. So let's just clear this. And then let's get started with the eye here. So now what I'll do is I'm going to go down here and I'm going to remove the split screen view, and then I'm just going to move the whole thing in. Then I'll just do a little bit of a sanity checking here, just so that it fits a little bit better. Like we don't have to like fit it perfectly to the anatomy model. It's just nice to do a little bit of sanity checking before we get too far along with this. But I do recommend that you don't just project something like this from a scan or a model, I highly recommend that you do your very best to make sure that this feels like a character by yourself, and then you can do these kind of sanity checks. But you can see we're in a pretty good spot, so let's just get this back here. I just want to do a little bit of a sanity check before we got ahead of ourselves. So the way I'm going to do the eyes now is, first I'm going to make sure that we have, you see the curve here? Really important that we get this curve here as well. So just make sure we get this nice curve, because remember, it wraps around an eyeball, and an eyeball has the word ball in it, which should indicate that it's pretty curved. But yeah, we can't do it properly until we have an actual eyeball in the in the cavity here, and we'll do that in not too long. So cool. Now we have it. It's wrapping around a little bit. Then I'm just going to add a little bit of geometry right here for the corner of the eye. This is really important, and if you're missing this, the eye is going to feel a little bit weird. And then I'm just preparing the volume a little bit. Just preparing the volume for the actual lids. The more you prepare like this, the easier it's going to be to sculpt. And then with the damp standard brush, I just have this set to the hotkey 1, 2, 3, and 5. These are my main brushes. So here I can just very quickly change between the brushes. So with the damp standard, I just carve in this. This is what I was talking about before, where it's like you're drawing in the shape. You can, of course, sculpt it in as well with the clay brushes, but I find this to be really handy because I get very specific shapes this way. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to get this line in here, like this is this line here, like this one here. Whoops. This is this line going around it like so. And then we need the highly specific plane change we're talking about, like this one here. And this will definitely get a lot easier once we have an actual eyeball to wrap this around. But what I want to make sure that I do is that I make sure that I have a proper plane here. And whenever I'm doing planes like this, I tend to just do this with the standard brush. You have so many planar tools in ZBrush, like the Trim Dynamic and H-Polish and such. And those are, of course, fantastic. But I find it to be more useful to define them first with the standard brush. And then I'm going in later on to really make them properly planar using the aforementioned planar tools. Cool. Now we have some slightly better eyes. And I just have to make sure that we move the cheekbones down a little bit, just so we have a bit more space in here. So just pushing this in, doing like so. And then I'm just going to simplify this volume into one nice and clean shape, like so. Cool. And just adding a bit more volume to this shape, like so. Something to think about as well when it comes to sculpting eyes is you can draw one point here, and then you can draw one point here at either end of the corner. In this case here, we're doing pretty generic eyes. So this line is pretty straight. But in some people, this line goes like this and this. So they have really they have eyes which goes at this angle. And some people have eyes that go at a different angle. They have way more of slanted eyes like this. And this can change the look drastically. And it's a really interesting way of sculpting when you're just aware of these 2 points. Instead of trying to move stuff up and down, you're just oh, this point here goes down, this point here goes up. It just changes the look very, very quickly on your characters. A note as well, which is really easy to forget, is there's actually a fair bit of volume in here. When it comes to a quick discussion regarding this, actually, why there is volume here. When it comes to general muscles in the body, you have pretty big muscles on your chest and in your arms and such. And the reason for that is not because you need to lift up your hand. Your bicep will lift up your hand for sure. So you can grab an apple and eat or something. But it's not because the hand is inherently really heavy. It's because you're lifting something heavy in your hand. You're holding something really heavy in your hand. You have to lift that up. And that is why you have big muscles, hopefully, in your arm. Because the thing you're holding might be 50 kilos. In the face, though, that doesn't really work the same way. We have some muscles, going from here and down like so, and all these kind of things going like so. And that's to move the lips around. But only the lips. Like, it's not what you have in your lips. It's not like it's the lips plus like 30 kilos of something. It's just moving this flesh up here to here, which means that the facial muscles are tiny, and you can basically only see them when you get old or in facial expressions. Like if you're pulling something like some very specific facial expressions, you normally can't actually see too many of the facial muscles directly. The face is mostly bone, fat, and then skin, and facial expression or facial muscles become more important once you're dealing with facial expressions. Some exceptions to this is where you do have to actually have legitimate force in your body is if you're chewing. You know, the jaw goes from here to up because, you know, you need to properly chew something. You might have like something like a nut or something really hard to chew. And in order to do this, you need some pretty strong muscles. And you have one muscle that goes from here to here. And then you have one muscle that goes from like up here. And this is one a lot of people don't know about. And it goes down like so. And this becomes really important because that means there is a fair bit of volume in these areas. Because you can see this, right? There's a fair bit of volume. And if this was just to bring the jaw open, it would just be like a tiny little thing, but it's not. So that's pretty important. And that was a very long way of saying that up here, there's a fair bit of volume. So just make sure that we get this volume in. Another interesting point is if you look at the cheekbone as well, the widest point of the cheekbone is here. So that's important as well. We will just have to make sure that's the widest point. And one day I will learn how to draw arrows. That's going to be a very nice day. But that day is not today, my friends. And now you can see that he gets a very strong jaw here. I'm just going to soften off the jaw and I'm just going to push in a lot of these cheekbones here. It's just so it becomes a little bit more balanced as well. So cool, you know, he's starting to look like a person. And then we have to get in some of the muscles as well in the neck. So we have some general muscles we have to get in. We have this guy here, which is the sternocleidomastoid, which is a mouthful, but it really just means goes from sternum to the clavicle to the mastoid process, which is the guy up here. So we just have to get it down here. And what we're missing now is we're missing the clavicles. So we just have to make sure we have the clavicles. And then we also have the trapezius that goes like so. So if you don't have the bones, it's really hard to actually properly sculpt. So I'm going to just simplify this whole thing down like so. And same thing with the neck as well. Just simplify the whole thing. I like to think about the neck as like fundamentally a cylinder. That simplifies it a lot for me because there's so much stuff going on in the neck. But if you can just make it into a cylinder like so, it's basically a cylinder that inserts itself like diagonal, like so. That is like a pretty good way for me to think about it. So I'm just gonna move this in a little bit. And just simplifying this down a little bit more. Still have some of the messiness from the original sculpt. And then from here, I'm going to get in and just draw in some clavicles. And the clavicles will have to get curved because if these were to be straight and you would like shrug, you would like kill yourself because then if this was straight and you were to like do this, you would completely strangle yourself. So think about it like this. Think about it as a shape that has a lot of curve in it, like so. But yeah, this is not a neck tutorial. I want to focus mostly on the face. But now we have that, and that means we can get the trapezius muscles going, which I'm just gonna really quick get some quick stuff in here. This goes from the back of the head here, and it goes in here, and it goes into the clavicles. And then I'm going to get in the sternocleidomastoid as well. Muscle names are wacky. Some names are based on the origin and insertion points. Some are like this sternocleidomastoid. Some are based on the shape it makes, like the trapezius, which is trapezioid. And some are just like some random Greek things, like who knows when it comes to it. So anatomy names are pretty tricky. If only there was like a nice system for this. That would have been really nice, like a unified anatomy name system. But alas, there is not. There's only memorization. So cool. Then we have to work a little bit on the lips as well. And the way I like to think about the lips is we have a line going through here. And this is broken up by a few different shapes. So we have a balloon which goes like here. Then we have a balloon that goes here. And we have a balloon that goes here. And this will look something like this, this, and this. Then on the bottom, just removing this now, we have a balloon that goes here and a balloon that goes here. And there's also like a sheet here connecting those two balloons. So this looks, you can see here the sheet, it looks like so. Like so. And you have a nice little sheet here, only on the bottom lip. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to simply just sculpt this in with the, or rather draw them in using the damn standard brush. And then just really making sure we have a nice separation here. And then at the corner of the mouth, like so, it's really important that we properly just like push this corner in. This is a really big beginner mistake where you don't properly push this volume in. And then I'm going to get this little like sheet here in. And this is going to just look like this. And I'm going to make it a bit more square as well. I find that the lips are a bit more square than you think. And just pushing this in a little bit, or continuing this whole thing, and then unifying it. And then we'll do the two balloons. So like this. And this is like a symbol, meaning that this is not true. It's a simplification of it, but it's a useful simplification. And then I'm going to just draw on top like so. Just draw this line in. And I'm just going to draw in this. And it's really important that these two meet at the corner. If they don't meet at the corner, you will have some weird looking lips. And then we just have to simplify this down, like soften it off, in this case with the smooth brush. Cool. Starting to get there. Then for lips as well, we have a shape going over like so. This is essentially a connection of a lot of different muscles going around here. And they all go into like one point, basically. So this is like a node just going on top here. And this goes over, and we just have to make sure this goes underneath as well. So there's a shape tucking over it, and there's a shape tucking in underneath it like so. And if you get this right, you will get really nice and natural looking lips. Here as well, you can see a bit of a mistake, which is a pure shape mistake. If you look at it here, you see it goes in, out like so, and it goes up. It just looks a bit wobbly. So I just have to make sure that I unify this whole shape. It's really important at this level, at this stage of the model, that we have really good and clean shapes. All right, cool. I'll just simplify the laser label fold down a little bit. And in some people, you can really, really see this whole thing. And in some people, it just kind of disappears around here. All right, it's getting somewhere. And here's a line I prefer to get in as well. This is a line going around like so to so. And you can do this as a pretty straight line. This essentially gives you the plane change off the nose. So this means we have a nice clean plane change like so. So just get this shape in here. Cool. Just gonna move the eyes out a little bit like so. And then I'm gonna go over a lot of this and I'll unify it. So now in general, we have a pretty decent anatomical sculpt. It's not perfect, but it feels more like a credible person. Or rather, you know, it could exist. It feels way too anatomical though, in the sense that it feels like somebody's looked at an anatomy book and they've just replicated what they've been seeing instead of looking at a person in the street and trying to recreate that person. So that's really important to do. Now, before we get into that, we still have a few things to define. One of them being the ears and one of them being the nose, because the nose hasn't got any love whatsoever. So the way, well, it's got a little bit of love. It needs a bit more. The way I like to think about it is as a like triangular shape, where we just make this into a nice little triangle, like so. And now we can push the tip down a little bit. And then I'm just going to push in the nostrils. It's really important to get the nostrils into the nose. And now we are reaching the point where the smooth stronger might be doing us a disservice, because now you can see it just destroys everything here. So we want to be a little bit careful with that. We can always switch back to the regular smooth brush. And here you can see how I like to think about the nose in terms of the plane changes. It's really handy to simplify the nose because there's so much stuff going on in the nose. So here, this is all bone. So whatever is up here is bone. Then here we have cartilage. So this is all cartilage, and you can simplify it down like so. And here we have some specific shapes going in like so. You can see this as well if you were to Google something like nose drawing diagram, and then you can see essentially what's going on here. But I want to have this shape here go in like so. I want to have a nice little plane change here. Then I want to have this thing here go across like so. And then it should go in and tuck in here. And then we have this shape here going up like so. And then we have the plane changes here. So that's how I'm thinking about it now. Like the reason I'm doing these drawovers is because yes, it's useful to just see me sculpt, but it's much, much, much more useful if you understand how I'm thinking, because otherwise you won't be able to recreate it yourself. This is not a sculpting demo. This is hopefully a tutorial for teaching you how to sculpt more natural looking faces. So I'm just getting in these plane changes here. And the cool thing is most people will have these exact plane changes. They're just bigger or smaller, or proportion-wise, they're a bit different. But once you understand these plane changes, or rather, not just understanding them, but memorizing them, once you've done this a fair few times, it's going to get much, much, much easier to sculpt noses. Because then what you can do, you can just keep on moving these different plane changes around, and you're going to get completely different noses. So just moving this up. So now this is where you can see, right, like this part here is not going to change a whole lot due to it being bone. But now what you can do, you can, if you just were to move this, you can like move the cartilage around. Like you can make this cartilage be much bigger. You can make it be much smaller. You can make this shape here go here, here, here. You can do so much with the actual cartilage. That's one of the reasons it's really useful to know what something is made out of. And then we have the philtrum. The philtrum is this little guy here. That's still a little bit in from the original model, and that's cool. So the philtrum is just a specific shape on the top here. And everyone will have the philtrum too, to some extent. All right, cool. And then we have the ears as well. And then we almost have a consistent sculpt. Now, some stuff we have to consider here is the ears will have the same building blocks. Basically, every single ear will have the same building blocks. And one of them is this shape going around like so. So we just have to make sure this shape is here. And then we have, this is all cartilage. Then we have this, which is more like fat, which goes down like so. And then we have, you can simplify this basically into a few different shapes. You have one shape going here. And then we have essentially one shape that goes in like so. And this becomes pretty important to memorize because you can't just do random shapes for the ears. You have to be quite specific when it comes to the ears. And like we mentioned in the beginning, one of the biggest beginner mistakes is that the ears are way too thick. This is one of those cases where you should just touch your ears and you should just start to feel how incredibly delicate they actually are. So I prefer to like go around here and just really carve this stuff here in, like so. And then we can just start to draw these shapes into it. Like so. And then we can straight up just like hollow it out. Here I'm just drawing like in a circular fashion like this. Like it's like I'm doing this. So just hollowing this whole thing out. And this is where you would have the hole for this goes into the brain, right? Like this is where you actually perceive sounds. So this is really important to get right. So just hollow this whole thing out. And then we will start to get in these shapes. And then we have these shapes going around. This is the anti-helix, which is the opposite of the helix. This is the anti-helix, and this is the helix. And then we go up like so. And you can see I haven't dynameshed it. It's still the same poly count, even though it's getting a little stretched here because of we're adding a whole new feature, like we're adding the ears. So the cool thing is really that like the ears are quite unique. So you can probably identify a person by the ears, but it's the proportion of these different parts. It's not like one person is just going to have like an extra like helix or something. It's the same thing with like the face, right? Like everyone will have the same general building blocks, but then they have the proportion is different. The skin type is a bit different. All these kind of things will just affect the final result. But if you understand this, it becomes so much easier. Because then you can, instead of just going, oh crap, I don't know how to sculpt this guy's ear, and you're trying to look at all the different like drawing charts online, you're just like, all right, cool, I know what to look for. Cool, so we're in an okay spot now, and I'm just gonna make the ear a little bit bigger. And in some people, the anti-helix, this shape here, breaks the silhouette, so it goes out like so. And in some people, it doesn't. And the frustrating thing about sculpting ears is you're sculpting, like you're Googling like ear, and you're trying to sculpt like a generic ear because you assume every ear is kind of the same. And you sculpt one ear, and then you need it from a different angle as well. And you're like, oh man, this doesn't look at all like the first one did. And now you're trying to sculpt this one nice cohesive ear, but you just end up with an amalgamation of like 3-4 completely different ears. So cool, now we have an ear which is in an okay spot. Just gonna push it in and out a little bit like so. All right, cool. So that means that we essentially have anatomically every single feature down. So now we have to make sure the character feels more designed. Now I'm not gonna make this like completely change the design. I'm still gonna generally work with what we have, but I'm going to give it a little bit more character. So what I'll do is I'm going to change the split screen down here, and then I'm just going to hide the planes, and then we can append, and then we can append a sphere. And here we have a nice little sphere. Just see where this is in space. If this happens and stuff is just completely weird in space, then what you can do, you can select the primitive. You can go down to Tool, Deformation, and then Unify. And now this should pop up in space somewhere. So this is like a little trick if you get completely lost. So what I'm doing now is I'm moving this to the screen left side, not character right side. And I'm just gonna make sure this is in the center. Hold down Control and Shift to snap it. I will assume you know how to do this. Because this is just literally moving a sphere. The size of an eyeball is around 2.5 centimeters, which is pretty much bang on 1 inch in freedom units for those people watching. So we will just put them in like so. And then I'm just going to use Mirror and Weld. You can find Mirror and Weld as well under Tool, Geometry, Modify Topology, and then we have Mirror and Weld right here. And you can see I was actually in a pretty good spot. You know, it's not terrible. It needs a bit of tweaking, but eyeballing it actually worked pretty well. And that was not a deliberate pun as well, I'm sorry. So just pushing this in. And what's really important is that it actually wraps around the eyeball. So I'm going from a few different angles now and just really trying to make sure it wraps around. And then I'm going to go to Lightbox, hit the comma key, go to Brush, and actually I'm not going to use this. I'm just going to hold down the Shift key. And then I'm just going to go to the smooth brush and just find the smooth brush, which is right here. So this just means I can now use a smooth brush without my mesh being reduced to absolute rubble. And then I'm just going to soften off some of these areas. Just to simplify them down a little bit. And that's a bit too much. This is what I was talking about when it comes to the smooth brush being the destroyer of worlds. Like it actually removes way too much sometimes. So I just want to make sure that I go in here and I control it a bit more. So what I need to do now is I need to unify this, because obviously now this looks like an anatomical person, and we don't want an anatomical person, we want a person. So that means that we can have to go over the whole thing and just soften things off. And the way I like to think about this is not like just go over and smooth the whole thing, but you go over this with the clay builder brush, reduce the intensity down to between like 2 and 10, depending on the poly count. And then we just go over this and we just start to work up the shapes. We just go over and we just refine. This is not a destruction pass. We're not destroying the form. We are refining the form. And again, I'm just going over the shape. Meaning if the shape goes like this, I'm working like this. This gives me a really nice and clean surface. So I'm unifying everything and I'm trying to make the shape stronger. Wherever I'm going over now, I'm trying to make that area look better. So this is in no way just a destruction pass. So you can't substitute going in here and refine the shape just with the smooth brush. So same here as well. We definitely want to see some plane changes, but you don't want to see like all the plane changes off the face, like off the skull rather. In some people as well, you can barely even see the bony landmarks. And in some people, it's so apparent. So this is why you need a real world reference whenever you're sculpting a realistic human. Well, if you're sculpting anything really, but you can't just make a generic human from scratch, because the amount of variation between people is insane. Same here as well. Just getting rid of this plane change. You still want a little bit of it here, but we just want to really like soften it off. And no smooth brush here, just good old clay buildup with alpha 06 and a low intensity. And just working up the lips a little bit. And we'll definitely need more resolution at some point, because we can't take a full character up from like at 1 million polys. We probably need one more resolution, which would make it around 4 million. The reason you know that is because subdivision adds 4 times. It doesn't double it, which is pretty easy to assume that when you subdivide, you increase it by twice. But each polygon goes from being like this to being like this. Just a little quick side note here. So just going over and refining the shape. And here as well, we have a fat pad here, which is really important to get right, because in young people you won't really see too much here, but in old people or aging people, I guess everyone's aging to some degree, but then this here will really go down. So in some people you can really see this thing just being all the way down like so, and you can barely even see their top eyelids. In this guy here, we aren't really going to do too much of that. We're just going to add a little bit. But it's really important to understand these general plane changes, and that's what we are doing in like this, right? With the anatomy model, just getting this shape here in. And then I'm just going to carve this in a little bit further. And then for the eyes, I want to carve in a bit of a like an iris here. The iris is the colored part of the eye. And then you have the pupil, that is the black part of the eye. And the pupil is basically nothing, like meaning it's literally black because of the lack of anything there. And now he looks pretty creepy, so let's just move this a little out to the side and move him a bit up like so. And now you can see he looks a bit more like a person right away. If you were to do a quick render as well, he's hopefully going to look a little bit more like a person as well. It's pretty important to think about the real world whenever you're sculpting. People have pupils, people have eyeballs. These kind of things are just really important, because it's so easy to sculpt something and then it just doesn't look right, and you cannot for life of it figure out why it doesn't look right. Well, maybe the whole thing doesn't look right because the size of the pupils is far too large. And you know, you have the best shapes in the world, like it's a Michelangelo level sculpt, but he looks high as a kite because his pupils are like absolutely massive, right? So you just have to consider these things. Really, really small and subtle things can have huge ramifications on your sculpt. All right. Just making this a little bit wider and moving these out just a little bit. Oh, one thing we have to address a bit as well is the corner of the eye as well. That was not really properly done. I just kind of threw in some polygons here. I really want to make sure that that's working and just, you know, get in this shape here. And then just getting in this shape here where the corner of the eye is. And this is not going to be absolutely perfect. You know, this is going to be a pretty quick sculpt. You know, this is just me sculpting real time, but probably about an hour or so in total. So hour 10 maybe. So it's more for you to get an idea how I would fix a sculpt, like the beginning sculpt, instead of really knowing how to sculpt every single thing to perfection. Here though, I want to make sure this is more even. Like I said, get the eyes right. You really, really don't want to rush the eyes. And the eyes look strangely feminine now. And the reason for that is that they look like this. They just have a nice curve to them. And I want to make them a bit more like classical, like a bit more like Michelangelo-like. So I'm going to give it a plane change right there. So just doing a bit like this and a bit of a plane change like so. And just making the eye a little bit larger as well, or the actual eyelid as well, a little larger. All right. Cool. So then I'm going to get a few wrinkles in the forehead in, because right now this is just pure bone. So I want to get in some of these wrinkles. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to simply just carve them in. Now, I'm going to use symmetry for this right in the beginning, just so we can like block them in, and then I'll work on top without symmetry. And trying to integrate the wrinkles a bit as well, and just making sure these shapes here continue like so. And I'll just move this down a little bit as well. I do as much work as I possibly can with symmetry, and then I'll remove symmetry later on to break it up. And then I can do a fair bit of sculpting without any symmetry on top at all. But I prefer just to do as much as I can, and the reason is purely the fact that it's twice as fast. The result tends actually to look better if you work without symmetry. So if that's your goal, then it's a good idea to work without symmetry. At least, you know, do some studies of it. But definitely the first stages should be done with symmetry. All right. And just unifying some of these shapes here. And I just want to push this in a little bit as well up here, because this usually goes a bit more like up and then a bit inwards. If you look at our anatomy model, you can see what happened here. You can see it goes up and then in and then out. In and then out. So I just want to have a bit more of that. And it's very dangerous to assume that you're just sculpting a generic person. And like you have a skull and this is just a generic skull and all skulls look like this. And obviously that's not true, because you can go out into the street and you can see so many people that look completely different. And that's one of the reasons is because of their skull shape is completely different. I'm just going to make the eyes a little bit bigger as well, because they're a little bit small to me. And that means I'll have to go in, and I'll just have to go in and scale up the eyes as well, like the actual eyeballs. and just pushing them a little bit closer. All right, cool. And then I'm just going to age them up a little bit. So just going to add a few more wrinkles around here. Some of these wrinkles here will just follow through like so. Some more wrinkles here. And let's just wrinkle up his lips as well. Like you'll have to wrinkle up his lip anyway, simply because there isn't really any variation in these lips so far. And we can just soften this off a little bit as well. Cool. And then here, I'm just going to add a lot of volume because we're missing a lot of volume in here right now. So I'm just going to soften off the jaw a little bit and just adding volume to this whole region. So you can see the vast majority of the changes to the model will happen in something like the first 20-30 minutes. And then the changes from here is of course important, but it becomes a little bit more like incremental, where instead of going from like 1 minute to the next for huge changes, it's more like from, it becomes like 10 minutes and then there are huge changes. And then you have like an hour to an hour and then like a day to a day where, you can see visible changes. Once you've been working on a model like this for a few days, you can barely see differences from day to day, though it's definitely there. It just becomes a little bit less. All right, cool. I'm going to subdivide. That just means Control D and just straight up subdivide the model. And this gives me a lot more resolution. It gives me exactly 4 times. And that means we have almost 4 million polygons. And this means that I have a bit more resolution to refine the model with. Like some stuff I want to do is I want to go in here and I want to unify the nose a little bit. Because like we talked about, you don't necessarily see all of these different shapes. They're there, but they're often, well, always covered by skin. Everything is covered by skin. When you say bony landmarks, and in this case here, cartilage, there's still skin on top of it. So you just have to make sure you really take that seriously. I'm just going over the model as well, like going over the nostrils here. Just trying to make the skin feel a little bit less elastic, trying to make it feel a little bit heavier. And here as well, you can break up the skin under the mouth just by, straight up just breaking it up. And just reducing this shape here a little bit. It's there, but it's less prominent. Like you always want to exaggerate stuff whenever you're blocking things in, and then you'll unify it. It's much easier to reduce something, like something that was too strong, than it is to make something that was too weak stronger. So I tend to just be a bit more brutal, be a bit less subtle, and then we can always unify this. And move the ears up a little bit. And you can see how much damage you can do in the sculpt, like how much you can do in the sculpt just with the damp standard or with the clay builder brushes. So just evaluating the model from all different angles. It's really important to evaluate the model from different angles. There are so many things that you're going to be able to see if you look at the model from a few different angles. For instance, here the cheekbones are too strong, so I'm just going to unify them a little bit, and I want to round off this shape here a little bit as well. And just push these out a little bit and push them in. And just rounding off the face here, or the skull here as well. Here's a little quick tip as well for how you can consider the skull to be. Whenever a big mistake is that you make everything too square. Like you do this and then you do this. And this is such a common beginner mistake that we have to just address it. The way you can think about it is almost like a helmet. that's kind of what the skull is, right? You have a nice little brain in here, and then the skull is there to protect the brain. So think about it as an actual helmet, like a motorcycle helmet. Imagine if you get hit here in the back, and here it's nice and curved. If you get hit here, and like you fall on a motorcycle or something, and this is now, the force is now going to be distributed across the whole thing. And that's really helpful, because that means instead of this force, which is, this force being equal to 1 going to 1 point, it's being distributed in like 10 different points. So it's at point 1 and point 1, and that means that you don't break your skull. On the other hand, over here, if you were to be hit here, all the force will be absorbed into 1 point. And that means if you get hit here, you die, because now it just cracks open like a watermelon. So that's bad. So the way you can think about this is, whenever you're designing anything, try to think about making something that, trying to make the character survive a motorcycle crash. That means, you try to make everything nice and round, and trying to make just, properly unified. Try to avoid big areas like this. Try to avoid like rough corners like this. Sure, there are definitely going to be some that are a bit more square than others, but just try to think about that. And that's going to have two effects here. First off, it's going to look better. The sculpt is going to feel a lot more natural. But second off, the design is going to feel more realistic as well. So just trying to make this feel a little bit more natural. Just going over this with a very low intensity. And then we can just soften off some of these shapes as well. Like, the thing is, you don't want brush strokes in the end. You want nice, clean shapes. And brush strokes can look nice. They can work as like a texture thing if you want something a bit more stylized. But end of the day, you're using the clay brushes because they're fantastic for adding volume, not because they're giving you the texture. And the reason for that is that, at least early on when you're sculpting, it's so easy to get caught up in the brushstroke frenzy, where you just tend to make everything brushstrokey instead of trying to make good shapes. So that therefore it can be a good idea to properly like do a smoothing pass at the end. And then of course, once you become a bit more advanced, then you can go in and you can go crazy with brushstrokes. Brushstrokes can really look super nice in a sculpt. They can add a lot of texture. Just be aware that the most important thing is not the sculptural texture, it is the underlying shapes. So cool. Now I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to break up the symmetry a little, and go up a subdivision level as well. And now I'm just going to go in with the clay buildup and just getting in some of these. And then we'll add some more diagonal shapes as well. Some people have almost like pure like vertical or diagonal lines like this, and some people have it's almost like 100% horizontal. And then I'm just going in here, and the way I think about wrinkles is like this. It's like it goes, oops, not like that. It goes like this, then up and like this. And that gives you very nice and organic wrinkles. And it also means they continue a fair bit down here as well. And sometimes they don't really connect, but they kind of connect up with the eye wrinkles. So just adding a bit more of this into it. Right, cool. Now our guy feels a lot more natural already, and we have a nice we have more resolution here. So that's really nice because it allows us to add more details into it. And this is definitely a good time to add more resolution, because now we can see that we can squeeze out some more juice out of our sculpts. But just don't add it like early on. Like it's really easy to add way too much resolution way too early on. And here as well, I find that there's often like a nice little texture, or like not texture breakup, like a skin breakup right here, where the skin goes over the cheekbones, and it gives you this nice little texture feel, which also means that you have a bit like a triangle shape right here. So like right here, you often have a bit of a triangular shape where this goes into the nasolabial fold, and this goes up here, like so. Depends from person to person, of course. So just aging them up a little bit, just making sure this fat pad here feels a little heavier. A quick way of aging somebody is just to make their skin feel heavier. Basically, you can try to just put the emphasis on the skin on the bottom, meaning that if we have a cross section of like this shape here, right now it's going like this. But if you were to make it older, you can make it like this. You can just really like droop the skin. Of course, based on gravity. And just simplifying this a little bit, I want to just remove the little bit of a line here on the lips as well. Not really remove it, just like make it a bit more subtle. Some people have really apparent lines here, and other people have barely anything. So this again depends on individual variation. Something to note as well that kind of just happened automatically in the sculpt, but sometimes is a real struggle, is there is a line here, or like the order of how the top and the bottom lip works is this is on top, and then this is quite a bit below it. So there's almost like there's a line here, like a diagonal line like so. A common beginner mistake is to make these like even like so. And yes, this does happen in nature for sure. You know, by nature, I mean with people, but more often not, it looks more like this. And here's a fun little thing as well. If you were to draw like a rule of thumb, like one of those proportion ones, is if you draw a line here and then like a line here or dot there, often this is one straight line. So from the tip of the nose, it goes down and it touches this angle, and it goes down and touches this angle. So that can work quite well. And also here as well, when we're doing this, I'm also observing that we have to make sure that this feels a little bit more natural, and this is a little bit cartoony, so we just have to soften these things out. So it's a really good idea to go in and start to analyze the model. I usually do this, like I just start to draw over my models from different angles like this, because this just forces me to evaluate what's actually going on. One of the best forms of reference you can actually have when it comes to sculpting is scan reference. The reason scan reference is so darn good is because it's not open for any kind of interpretation, at least if it's a good clean scan. The problem with a lot of like images or like anatomical charts and such is that like the images will have way too much hidden in shadow, and maybe they have makeup on and all sorts of stuff. And the problem with anatomical charts is it's just some person who's interpreted reality, and maybe they did it like 200 years ago and then nobody questioned it, and now it just becomes gospel. So scans, they don't care at all about any of that. Like if some dude made a chart 200 years ago, the scan doesn't care. The scan is just objective truth. So particularly when I'm doing like mentorships with my students, I always tend to use scans, at least in the beginning, because then we have some common truth to talk about. It's a huge problem is if you're using vague reference, because then you're not speaking the same language. You're not understanding the same shapes. And you can find a lot of good scans simply by going to Sketchfab and searching for like human scans or like portrait scans or face scans and that kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm sure you can buy them there, but you can also just like look at them in the browser. And then you can take screenshots of them, and then you can really incorporate that into your art. I also just want to do a quick little thing here when it comes to the upper parts of the torso. I'm not really going to explain too much what I'm doing here, more than the fact that like now I'm doing the pecs. The pecs connects up to the clavicles, and they connect up to the sternum. It's just important to have a little bit of volume, like so. And I'm just going to soften off this as well a little bit. Right, cool. So, we're in a pretty good spot now compared to where we were in the beginning. This is a model that I can see myself taking a lot further by spending a fair bit more time on it, refining and all that, giving it some hair and that kind of stuff. But, it's in a pretty decent spot right now. Something to consider as well is you have to give people eyelashes and eyebrows if you want somebody to feel like who they're supposed to be, if you're doing a proper likeness study. It's really hard to make somebody feel like a regular person if you don't give them that. So I'm just going to quickly go in and in this region here, just like, sculpt in some quick eyebrows. Not really going to do eyelashes. That's a bit more of a mission to do. So just going to put these in here. And it starts to feel a bit more natural right away. Whenever I'm doing kind of hair like this, I think about it not just as individual strands, but I think about it as like a mass. Like hair has volume, and particularly if you look at scans and some of like hair, you can really see how much volume there is in hair, or like eyebrows as well, or eyelashes. It's one of the problems with when you're scanning things. If you look at like human scans, I'm sure if you go for the Sketchfab and check them out, you're gonna be able to see that there is like around the eyes, sometimes stuff looks really weird because they've just been cleaning up some bad scans for just bad scan data in that area rather. So just giving them a little bit of some like hair in this region here. So that is the end of this sculpting video. Now I want to just quickly sum up what different stages are. The first one was we had to fix the proportion. It doesn't matter if you get in all the most beautiful anatomy in the world if the proportions are not working. And I recommend that you go back to the beginning of the video if you need to have a refresher on the general rules of proportion. But I really, really recommend that you internalize those rules to the point that you can sculpt basically a person from a sphere where those rules are, like they come as second nature to you. The reason for that is it's of course useful to have reference, but you shouldn't rely on reference. Reference should be there to help your art really be taken to the next level. It shouldn't be something that you require in order to even get started. So for instance, if you were to like line stuff up, like we did in the beginning, we lined it up a little bit, but not like a lot. We didn't really line this up to any like crazy photos, and it still looks, pretty naturalistic. Second stage is make sure you have good, clean shapes. Without that, you have nothing. End of day, everything in sculpting is down to good, clean shapes. Then third, we have to make sure that we get in the anatomy. This is to make sure that it feels like a credible living thing. We have to get in the fleshy parts, in all the bony parts, and you should be able to see what parts are bony and what parts are fleshy, just from looking at it without any kind of texture or subsurface or anything like that. And then the last part is making sure he feels like, a more of a specific person, more of a designed one, where you get in the eyes, get in the eyebrows. Ideally, we break up a bit more symmetry and all that. And then you just keep working on it. Then you keep going back to the proportions and the anatomy and getting into personality traits, the design phase, and you stop whenever you are at a good spot. Sculpting is not a linear stage where you go from step 1 to step 4. No, you're going to keep tweaking things. By adding the anatomical parts, you're going to see that, oh yeah, actually I have to move the eyes up or down a little bit. So everything is really connected up. So yeah, that's it for this sculpting video. I would love to hear what you think about it in the comments. If there was anything particular you thought was was fascinating, or if you picked something specific up. I would love to hear that as well. And let me know what kind of sculpting videos you'd want to see in the future as well. And don't forget to subscribe and click that little notification bell as well. And we'll see you in the future.